situations. Now, this is not just a situation that is happening on some, I mean, it's something like it's a daily basis. Now, why are these groups targeted, and what is the challenge for us African people? So we want to thank you all for signing in, for joining us on this conversation. We have time to reflect. We look back at the past and we're looking back into the future. So we want to welcome Professor James Small, who is sitting here in studio with us, ready to educate us and to tell us some aspect or some facts in our race and our community. Why is it that the Black man is targeted, and what are their challenges, and what is it that we can look forward as solutions? Welcome, Professor James Small.
Thank you, Sister Dr. Susan Tata. We shouldn't narrow it. When we narrow it down, it looks like something happening to Black people in the United States of America. This same thing is happening on the continent of Africa. From the Congo to South Africa, we saw what went on in Chad. We still don't know whether the president was assassinated. We don't know whether it was a coup. They said he was killed. Hey, we know there's 5,000 French troops in Chad. What sense did that make? There's more French troops in Chad than there's Chadian troops. Mm-hmm. And something happens to your president on a battlefield, and we accept it. The role of the American CIA in Chad. I'm going there first because we sometimes forget there's an African race that's nearly 3 billion or 2+ billion strong, scattered all over the world. Where we sit in Africa, we sit on the greatest wealth on the planet. Mm-hmm. Every nation is there trying to steal that wealth, and they will kill as many African men and women and children as they have to. More people is killed by the police in Congo every day than is killed by the white policemen in America in a month. But we don't make the connection, because we think this has to do with racism. This is not racism. Racism is just a small part of the miniature mind of poor whites who makes up the policing and the military apparatus of the major white powers. Okay. So we need to put the content in the right context. This is a war on African people wherever we are. The reason it looms so bright in America, because it's America with all the media and all of the other things, so you can see a demonstration. How many people yesterday heard, or day before, or a few days ago, heard the president of Malawi make a speech talking about those who were corrupt and those who were arrested for stealing funds for COVID and those who would be, because the Western media won't carry that. Okay? And yet that is pertinent to Africans' growth to hear the president of Malawi. But because it's the United States, the Western media carry anything that happens. In the last year, since 2020, let me tell you what the numbers look like, because we hear George Floyd and we think it starts and stops there. Mm-hmm. In 2020, 241 Blacks were killed. In 2020, you heard about maybe 5, okay? 241. Of that 241, I think 164 were men and the rest were Black women. In 2021 thus far, we're the 4th month in, 20 of us have already been murdered by the police, okay? 20, not 2, not 3. Day before yesterday, the day that the Chauvin verdict came down in the George Floyd killing, 30 minutes before, a young Black woman was killed. And that was if she had a knife and she was going to injure another person, the police may not have had a choice in that one. This goes on every day. The American police killed more people than any other country in the world. An average of 3 persons is killed by our police department every single day. Black people, we make up 2 out of every 3 that's killed by the police in America every day. So this is not just racism, this is systemic terrorism by the part of the military law enforcement apparatus in the United States of America. The police forces in America came into being as instruments for tracking down, torturing, killing, and returning Africans who were enslaved. That's where the police department was founded. That was its purpose. And they conduct themselves as though that is still its purpose, to control the African population, killing as many as you can, as often as you can, to keep them in their place, just as they did when we were on the plantations doing slavery. A lot of this can be taken back to the Berlin Conference, but we don't knit stuff up. We say, oh, you're Cameroonian. Oh, you're Nigerian. Then we get in Nigeria. Oh, you're Igbo. Oh, you're from Benin State. Oh, you're Yoruba. No, we're Africans. We're in Brazil. We're in Trinidad. We're in Jamaica. We're in Cuba. We're in Canada. We're in the United States. And we're in the 54 nations in Africa. If you can see that together, because white people in Africa don't behave any better than they do here. They'll play you a little bit more, but when I walked in so many situations in Africa where white folks are being Europeans and European Americans are trying to be the kindest, coolest people in the world until the African American walk in and they know we know them. So we know that's a pretense. We know that's hypocrisy. We know you've come for something and you think my brother on the continent don't know you like I know you. So when I walk on the scene, your behavior change because I know your behavior. And so what we've got to understand, there is a race war. There is a culture war. There is a spiritual war being waged by the United States and the other Western powers against Africa and her people anywhere we exist. This is not some personal rift between some Black Americans and white Americans. Because if we were the animals they were, we could kill as many of them as they do of us. But we don't do that. We try to use the government apparatus and the justice legal system and try to get some redress. The sad thing, except for the case of George Floyd, out of the 54 African nations, we never hear one of them speak up on our behalf.
Absolutely.
So we have no sanctuary. We're stuck to fight these people toe to toe because we have no sanctuary. The closest sanctuary we have, and I must give them credit, is the nation of Ghana, who has offered citizenship to our people. And they even have a legislation going before their parliament to offer citizenship to the formerly enslaved children in all of the diaspora. But they're the only one. You've got 60 to 70 million people who have been under terrorist attack for 400 years. And now one of our governments said, wait a minute, America. Those are our people. As though if you come here 100 years ago, you lose your race changed, but if you came 6 months ago, you're still African. These are the questions that need to be raised. Then we'll understand why the killing. You see, why the killing? The competition to the patriarchal white male society, especially in places like America, Britain, and Paris, and so forth, is the African man. He's already marginalized his women. And even though he's given them some play, he keeps them in. It's his major competition. He already knows, because we are in all aspects of his corporate structure, his scientific structure, the medical structure, the military structure. He knows that when given the opportunity, we soar. So how do you check your competition? The way you check your competition is to take away its opportunities. How do you take away its opportunities? You deny them access to education. When you deny people access to education, what happens? They're unable to provide the food, clothing, shelter for themselves and their family in the normal way. then what do they do? What do they resort to? They resort to crimes. And what do? Put them in prison. And the cycle just repeats. It is really strange, though, when you look and see over the last, just take 2 years, 90% of the Black men and women killed by police in America was unarmed, and none of them was involved in any criminal act. They were stopped for things like speeding ticket. As you know, that's not a felony of any sort. They were stopped on the streets for some reason. But they don't shoot the criminals. They have a relationship with them. They know them by their first names in the community. The people they're killing are not the people that is from the criminal element in our community. They're killing our everyday working class people. And that puts a terror in the heart of the community. Because the young man who's being funeralized today, Dwight, Mr. Wright, he was just scared. He was a 20-year-old kid. When that policeman tried to put the handcuff and he saw the other one with the gun, he jumped back in his car. He had nothing in his hand. He didn't hit them. He didn't threaten them. He jumped back in his car because he was frightened. Because all the things he sees on television, when they put that handcuff on you, the chances of you making it alive is 50-50, if not worse. So that boy, that child, panicked, jumped back in his car, and she shot him. He didn't hit the police. He didn't try to fight the police. He didn't call them bad names or anything. So there is a culture, an anti-African culture in America. We call that racism, but let's call it what it is. See, if we were talking about the Jews, they would say anti-Semitism. They wouldn't say racism. They would say you're being anti-Jewish. But we call it racism, and then you can kind of dilute that. This is an anti-African cultural response we are seeing from the police towards African people. And when you label it right, finding the answer becomes a lot easier. You say it's racism. What in the world is that, really? People play game with systemic racism. What is systemic racism? From the time we entered this country of North America, there have been an anti-African terrorism played out against our population, men, women, and children, from the time we were put on those slave ships, and is not abated to this day. The police simply represents the most public instrument. But if the politicians thought the police was wrong, why haven't they changed the laws and the rules? They have the power on any given day. Right now, there's a George Floyd police reform bill before Congress. The House of Representatives have already passed it. But the Republican-controlled Senate is refusing to pass it. And since Floyd's death, the federal government of the United States have not passed one piece of legislation to reform the police departments. Now, some local police units have reformed themselves or in the process of doing reform, a few of them, but not the main government. So what does that tell me? That the government then condones the anti-African behavior of its paramilitary instrument we call the police. You know, in this same cycle, 250 women have been killed by the police since 2015 in this country. 250 women. That's not happening nowhere else in the world. Why is it happening here in America? You know? But most of those women were Black women. And we have to understand why it is to put terror into the Black population. Most people would like to think the way they we are portrayed in the media as criminals, break dancers, and people who just sing. People of the world, we are more than 60 to 70 million. We aren't all out there rapping and breakdancing and playing basketball. Only a few thousand of us are doing that. The other 60 plus million of us are working class people or middle class people who have high school education, and about 1/3 or more of that have college education. We're working in all the corporate structures of America. We are lawyers, we are doctors, we are business people. Why don't they portray that African American as the daily image on the screen? Because if you portray that person, you can't justify murdering to ask with George Floyd. But it's not just America. This type of anti-African terror behavior exists in Britain, Paris, Germany, Italy, Spain, China, and we need to stop pretending that it don't. Holland, and we need to stop pretending that it don't. It exists in the Arab Muslim world. So to all my African Muslim brother and sisters, yes, you just had Ramadan Mubarak, and I hope you had a wonderful time. But I remember going into Jeddah in 1974 to find out that in 73 and 74, they were killing African Muslims in the streets. So Nigeria in 1975 had to send the Nigerian National Guard there and send the Nigerian Boy Scouts to police the area where the African Muslims were staying. So we need to stop and take the blinders off of our eyes, that there's an anti-African culture that pervades the governmental behavior, especially at the police level structure, in all non-African countries, because all of them are engaged in stealing the wealth of Africa, and all of them are engaged in using the brains of Africans in the diaspora, but don't want them to come together to enjoy the wealth of Africa for themselves, or to use those brains to build African institution and industry for themselves. And that does produce at the most local level and at the level of the white individual hatred and this attitude we call racism. And if you ask one of them to justify and say, well, why do you hate the Africans? Why do you have this racist view? You enslaved the Africans, but you are angry with them. They should be angry with you. You are the enslaver. You colonized me, but you're angry with me. I should be angry with you. It makes no logical sense except to justify the behavior of misusing the talents and the wealth and the resources of Africa to build Europe and European institutions across the world to sustain it and maintain it. That habit of behavior have become a culture, an anti-African culture. And it is that anti-African culture that we are calling racism. But racism is just one level of manifestation of the anti-African culture that pervades all Western and Asian and Middle Eastern capitals, all of them. And Africans need to stop pretending we only have one another. We only have the 54 nations in Africa, the diaspora in Europe, the Caribbean, Latin, and English and French-speaking Africans, and Brazil, and Colombia, and the other Spanish and Portuguese-speaking African nations. That's who we have. We don't have any other friends culturally, or intellectually, or politically, or militaristically, anywhere else in the world. And so that gets manifested in America, that if I see a black man, I don't have to say, excuse me, sir. your light on your car is broken or your license plate is missing, do you have your driver's license? I walk up to the car and say that to a white man or a white woman. But when I walk up as a policeman to the car of a black man, I said, get out, get on the ground, hands in the air. And if you move too slow, you're a dead person. And we see it over and over, week after week, month after month, year after year. And we're still referring to it as racism. It's deeper than that. It is an anti-African culture that has festered and been bred into so-called Western civilization for hundreds of years. And it has been bred into that civilization so that they can rationalize and justify the robbery of Africa and her resources and the robbery of the talents and the intellect of the African persons, especially in the diaspora, without anyone saying anything. I think it was some man, where is he? I'd like to see, I don't know what I did with it. But it was some British soldier or diplomat in 1863. Yeah, and I'm going to read this. He said, I've traveled across the length. He's talking about Africa, right? I've traveled across the length of the breadth of Africa, and I've not seen one person who's a beggar, who's a thief. Such wealth I have seen in this country, such high moral values, people of such caliber, that I do not think we would ever conquer this country unless we break the very backbone of this nation, which is her spiritual and cultural heritage. And therefore, I propose that we replace her old and ancient education system, her culture. For if the African thinks that all that is foreign and English is good and greater than their own, they will lose their self-esteem, their native culture, and they will become what we want them, a truly dominated people. Lord Macaulay's address to the British Parliament, 2nd February 1835. Well, they've carried out that policy. They've enforced that policy. The Brits have, the French have, the Italians have, the Spanish have, to this day. And that's what you see manifesting in the shootings of blacks in America. If you try to see it separate from the rest of Africa, you won't understand what's going on. I think Dr. Francis Welsing says if you fail to understand the true nature of racism and white supremacy, everything else you think you know will only serve to confuse you. And you cannot understand white supremacy and racism unless you understand its relationship to Africa itself and African peoples worldwide. And we're afraid to make the connections because we're afraid of our enemy. They've instilled this fear in us. You know, if I criticize someone from Nigeria, they won't, even our own people don't say, oh, he's criticizing his own people himself. They would say that Black American is criticizing the Nigerian. The Nigerian is the same African I am. I look like any man from Calabar or anywhere down there. My people come from Nigeria, Sierra Leone, from Ghana. So, you know, I have some native people, but those native people that lived on the east coast of America, they came from Africa before Columbus. I know my people, I know my history, I know my blood, I know my genes. And I didn't show up on the scene last week, people. I've been trying to talk to you, my people, for nearly 60 years without taking a day off from work. Nearly 60 years. Okay. So I'm trying to say something significant. The killings in America that we see has little to do with the Black America and more to do with the Black African in a larger scheme of things. The Africans in America, just the ones that are descendant of the formerly enslaved, is producing an disposable capital of over $1.7 trillion a year. What if we can tie just that into some African industries on the country? We have 100+ black colleges, separate from all the thousands of white colleges that we attend. But all of the high-tech things they've bought with what they've stolen from the resources of Africa. What if we could use those people we trained to send home to help sort of integrate with our own engineers and scientists and doctors that's already on the ground every year? What if we could do what Israel does in building a nation by utilizing its diaspora and the technology and the wealth that diaspora brings with it? Well, no one wants to see that. So you keep people living in fear and terror and disruption and psychosocial and cultural dislocation from one another. And you can rule over them. We just lost President of Chad. And I was reading up on the history of Chad, the most recent, because I've always been up on Chad. I have a special relationship with Chad. And when the oil was discovered in Chad, and they discovered it a long time ago, but when they decided to explore it and build a pipeline to Cameroon, the World Bank stepped in and said, okay, we'll put up the money to have you do this, but all the revenue that you get from your oil must be placed in Citibank in London. Wait a minute. Why can't the revenue from the oil of Chad be placed in a bank in Chad? And then the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank decide that you're going to we will tell you what the money will be used for. And then we're only going to give you 12% of your oil revenues. That's what's going on in America. You can't separate what is going on with us in America from what is going on in Chad. We saw Magufuli in Tanzania and what he had to do. And we saw us lose him. And we saw in Zimbabwe with our great president and what he had to do. And they even convinced us to put sanction on the one man that was showing us how to come out from under European economic, political, and cultural dominance. Well, in America, the killing of black man is about maintaining dominance over an African population that makes it about the 5th largest African nation in the world and one of the wealthiest in the world and one of the most technically trained in the world. But if you keep it disrupted, living in terror, living in fear, disunited through these murders and corrupt education system that do not train you to do anything except go in the penitentiary or the prison, then you can control them despite all of that wealth and education that they have. And that's what they've been doing. We spend more time fighting over 1 or 2 people getting killed in the streets almost every week than we fight over building an institution that will keep them from being killed in the street every week. So what do we do? And what we have to do is realize that the killings of black men in America and the killing of black women in America is tied to Western dominance of Africa, period. If you make the separation, you've lost the game. If you understand the relationship, you're on your way to victory because you know what the problem is, and you now can move towards solving that problem. Terrorism for the sake of population control is nothing new. And once you put a young man in prison at 18 or 15 or 14, unless he's got a good, strong family or community, his life is destroyed forever. Do that with 500,000 people a year, and in 10 years, how many millions of the African male youth you've destroyed? And then blame them for their own destruction because now they're on drugs, they're homeless, and they're back and forth into prison. And you say, oh, look, that's who they are. And the world being afraid not to identify with the white supremacist cultural dominance of the world. So yeah, that's them. Those are the Black Americans. Look at their pants, they're sagging. Well, there's 60 to 70 million of us that don't have sagging pants. We have high school degrees and college degrees and businesses and all kinds of other things, and law degrees and medical degrees and everything that everybody else in the world have. Do you look at me? I'm a professor, retired. Wife is a medical doctor. A son that's a high school principal. One that's a medical administration at one of the biggest hospitals in the city. Another daughter that's an administrator and educator in Brooklyn. Another that owns her own record company. Another that owns her own catering business. And another that's the chief guidance counselor. Is that the Black family they show you on TV? And I'm not an oddity. I'm less than average. But you miss all of that because they kill us no matter what degree we have, no matter what job you have, no matter how much you know, because we're talking about state terrorists. This is not a racist individual. These killings are tolerated by the state. The state has done nothing to abate it. And until we had the conviction of Chauvin the other day, we've only had maybe 8 to 10 conviction for people who have killed more than 400 people. And you had 8 to 10 convictions. That's an insult to humanity. And what goes on in the United States of America is a violation of the United Nations Charter of Human Rights in multiple ways. They violate our African culture by not allowing us to teach it in our schools and practice it in the way we wish to do it. They violate our lives by having law enforcement take so many of our lives every year and no justice come back to our community. There's multiple other ways that our human rights is being violated. But one of the sad things is not a single African nation have stood before a podium in the United Nations and say, you are committing a crime against humanity against my people. The way Israel would say it, the way India would say it, the way China would say it, wherever their people are. If you want to get to the bottom of why they would kill us and not be afraid of anybody, we have no sanctuary. We have no protection. We have no protectors except ourselves, and we are in their house. We have done well. Let nobody make no bones about it. We've been fighting these people for 400 years, unabated. Unabated. Study our history. There's a thread that runs from the 1600s to present where some of us was resisting and rebelling to our death. But this is true about Africans everywhere. They didn't come and take our continent easily. They never really took our whole continent anyway. They took little pieces on the shore where they could ship things out and control the waterways. They never conquered Africa. They conquered our mind. Mm-hmm. They conquered our minds with their education and their culture and their value system and their religions. Throw those things off, and we'll know how to get our Africa back and make out of it the Africa we want to see. And then African Americans would not worry about being shot down in the street because we got 54 mother, father nations who tell the world, you dare not touch mine. You dare not touch them. We have freedom fighters that's been in the American jails for 40 plus years. No one has spoken their name from another country. None. Matula, Mumia, Jamil. They fought for the African freedom movement, not just in America, because I know them and I was with them. We fought for any movement, Mozambique, Angola, South Africa, wherever, Guinea-Bissau. But no one has spoken up for us. That's why people feel we can kill them. They have no father. They have no mother, meaning we have no father country or mother country to speak for us. So we killed them. They don't have enough military force in America to fight us back. and we walk away. And the courts and the politicians is made up of the same European community, backed by the same European corporations. They could change the law like this and the killing will stop like this if the government apparatus wanted it to. But if you do that, then you will allow an African world to grow, that have its own sustenance and its own strength, and can be an asset to the mother country, father country, the continent of Africa. They don't want that relationship. They've never wanted it. And we haven't figured it out. We still think we can pick sides. We can come and join with the French, or we can join with the Americans, or we can join with the British. We think we can pick sides. Close your eyes and look at the 54 nations in Africa and open your eyes and see if you pick the side that's worthy of picking. You, my dear sister, you come from a country, Cameroon, where the British got a little piece they've cultivated to fight against themselves. Then the French got the piece they've cultivated to fight against themselves. Then you got the Arab influence in the north that got them who call themselves Muslim cultivated to fight against themselves. Then you got the Christians over here, and all of them are debasing anything African. Our tradition is juju, is witchcraft, is that. Everybody got a culture but us. Everybody's got a value but us. Everybody has a worldview except us. That's what the problem is. Not just some white guy who's racist killing some black guy that day because he didn't feel good. It is systemic, but it's systemic anti-African terrorism that permeates all Western states, from Australia to New Zealand. The same thing. We have to go as beggars whenever we go to any of their countries. We see this whole thing in America about immigrant. Do you ever see anything about the African immigrant? Do they tell you how they're treating our immigrants? No. They're putting them all in prison downtown New York and the federal correction facilities, and taking them back to the plains with a shopping bag or a plastic bag and sending them back home, or treating them like dirt, and they're in prison and don't know why they're in there. You see every other nation crossing the border as the immigrants. Do you ever see us? But we are afraid to ask the question, where's the African immigrant? How are you treating the African immigrant? And then our brothers and sisters, many who are here, they're too afraid to speak out. And when the African Americans go in the street to raise the political contradiction to speak out, they're afraid to move with us. And so the enemy know, and I understand. Right. I mean, if you're trying to make a living for your family and you're trying to maintain a green card and these things, you shouldn't be in the street. Let me be in the street, but let me know that you support me. All right? Let me go up front. Yes. We'll go up front. We'll go in the street. We could do that. But let me know you're there. Let me know you support me. Let me know that if all you can send is $10 to pay my bail, good. But don't make me the villain and make the enemy of our race your comrade and your ally. Mm. All of these are the reasons why they kill us with impunity, because we have no sanctuary. Who do we turn to? One nation do we call us, oh, father, mother nation. This foreign place where I'm only an immigrant is committing crimes against humanity against me. Who do we call? So large, 60 plus million. And that's with them not counting the Spanish speaking blacks, which would almost double our numbers. They only count the English speaking blacks. Okay? If they count the Spanish speaking blacks, we're almost 100 million. You hear me? And nobody's paying attention because they don't understand. That's why people are saying America's going to be brown in another 50 years. Because they're scared to say it's going to be black. Okay? So how do you keep these people who are about to become the majority within a half a century of North America from having power even when they become a majority? They showed us how they did it in South Africa with apartheid. This is nothing but apartheid with a better looking face. Okay? It's just apartheid dressed better. But that's what this is in America. You know, you're a prisoner in a cage, but your cage is bigger. So you're running around and thinking, oh, I'm free. I got space. No, there's a fence there on all four sides. You're still in a cage. You're not free. When I want to come in the cage and shoot you down because you raised too much fuss, then I will do it. And I will justify it because I have a badge and I have the authority to do it. And so what we have to do is the things that we've talked about on this show so many times, return to ourselves. You know, loving each other is a difficult thing. You know, I say, look, May, it sounds so pretty, it sounds so good, but it is not easy to love your own race people with all of the varieties that we have naturally. And now we have all the varieties of antagonism that we've copied from them. But yet we must learn how to do that.
Correct.
You know, if you look at the successful people, look at the Chinese. Wherever they go, they're Chinese. You look at the Indian, wherever they go, they're Indian. Mm-hmm. You look at the Jews, wherever they go, they're Jewish. They have a love of people culture. No matter what their ethnicity may be or may have changed to be, because they live in another environment under other cultural conditions. So in North America, if you really want to understand police brutality, police murder of members of the African community, the African American community, let me make something clear to people. African American is an ethnic designation. Africa is our racial designation. Don't confuse the two. Mm-hmm. One may say, I'm Yoruba, but I'm also Nigerian, and I'm also African. And no one has any contradiction with that. I'm an African American, but I'm African. America is my geopolitical space. Africa is my race. And so we combined it, our race and our geopolitical space, race first. The rulers of the world understand what we're saying. You know, I didn't give up Africa. I still want my stool and my grandmother, great-grandmother's stool. I still want my great-great-grandfather's skin, wherever it may be. Maybe in Cameroon, you're holding my skin up in the north. And Ghana, you're holding my stool in the south. I'm coming home to get my land back. I'm entitled to that under our ancestors' law, and I'm entitled to that under the protocols of the United Nations as regard any refugee people. We don't have to do that. We just have to love each other, know each other via our culture and our own history and spiritual system, and we could stop the killing in America. If Africa stood up and said we had enough, it would stop, trust me. If the African Union would take a serious position, said, we're going to tie your murdering my people to your contracts concerning my raw material. You keep murdering them, we will cut off the flow. What do you think they'll do? They'll treat us like kings. They'll ride us around in palanquin and wave fans over us. Because this is not about killing a few blacks in America. This is about an anti-African culture that pervades Western civilization. You in Germany, you know what I'm talking about. Walk out in the street. I know you feel it. You know, no matter how differently it's done there, I know who they are. And the Africans in Germany suffer from the same kind of racist abuse that we do in America. It's just not as overtly animated as in America, you know? But we know it's there. I've been to the UK. I see how they treat my people. You know, I see how they treat them in Holland. I've been to Italy. I see how we treat it. You know? So let's tell ourselves the truth. This is an anti-African thing we see manifested in America with the killing of black men, particularly because we challenge the patriarchal, white, male-dominated system. And he dare not allow an African to challenge him while he's trying to tell us we're inferior to him. He's got Oxford and he's got Harvard and whatever other foolish little confused institution he's got that he calls colleges and universities. But certainly with the long relationship they've had with us in Africa, and you have not done any better than this towards Africa, you got nothing you could say to me. There's nothing you can say to me. Now, I've talked enough, Sister Susan. Let me tell you something, my beloved teacher and doctor. They will always fight you because you've come to purvey truth to your people. They're not going to let you do it and say, oh, Susan is just so wonderful. She's got the technology together. No. They know who you are. You're an African. You're an African woman. So we just have to keep fighting. They take us down, we put ourselves back up. They take us down, we find another way. They say, you can't do this. We said, okay, we shift and we do it another way. But don't let them sadden your heart or your eyes. Your spirit is African. You're the mother of the world. That's not a cliche. That's a scientific truth. That's a universal fact. You are the mother of the world. That's why they want to kill your son. Because I inherit you, your powers. This thing of killing us is not some little petty thing. The one pulling the trigger may be petty, but the one who's encouraging it and allowing it and giving sanctuary to it, they know what they're doing. You understand me? So I didn't want to take it all over the place like that. But we've got to understand, if we don't tie it together like it really is, we won't be able to ever stop it. You know, we won't be able to ever stop it. And then they'll begin to make you think it's your fault. You only got killed because you did something wrong. You know, so I shot your woman in the back 5 times because she just looked like she might turn around with something in her hands. Oh, she's got her baby in her hands. Then it's too late. That's how foolish it all has been. But we've lived in it. We've had our families in it. We've raised our children in it. We've educated them in it. And we've returned to Africa from it. They'll never stop us. All the terrorism in the world, and that's what this killing amounts to. State terrorism against a particular racial group, the African race. They're not shooting Jewish people down or Indian people down. They said the Arab world have been trying to blow them up for decades. They're not shooting any Arabs down. Why us? We've been here as their comrade. We fight in all of their wars. We've helped them build their nation. Why us? The people who have blown up their buildings and fought wars against them, the Germans and others, they treat them like friends and comrades. But all the fighting with Russia, they're treated like friends and comrades. But we, who have fought in their military, served in their military, built their nation, take care of raising their children, they murder us in the streets like dogs because they're not murdering the Black American. They're murdering Africa in the streets like dogs. And if you see that, you see what the root of this is all about. But they can't stop us. They could kill this one, that one. In our culture, those spirits go back to the source from which they came, and they'll come back again with a knowledge of what you did to them. So you let them have their fantasy, but we must bring a stop to it because we've got 54 nations we need to build into one. Mm-hmm. And we've got another, how many, 10, 15 in the Caribbean we need to build into one. CARICOM have to be more than just a word. And we got Brazil and Colombia. You know, there's more Black people in Colombia than there is in America. But how many people know that or think of them? They're suffering, they're being abused in the same way we are in America. One beautiful sister who was one of the human rights advocates 2 years ago, who was just trying to advocate for jobs for her people in education. They found her side the road with her head cut off her body. She was blacker than you. But did anybody talk about her death? No. Just another African we killed in Colombia just like we killed them in Brazil and we killed them in America, because they have no sanctuary. They have nobody to speak for them. They have nobody to say, that's my child. And in the world of nation states, in the world of a United Nations body and all the other international bodies where these people could be spoken for, no one speaks for us. So the enemy feels they can do what they do. But we can go in the streets and burn their business down. They say, oh, you're burning on your community. We don't own the business there. We can cause them millions and billions of dollars by burning their places to the ground in retaliation for my blood you spill in the streets. And then you try to convince the world, oh, they're burning up their community. Those buildings are more important than that life you put 6 bullets in, or 10 bullets in, or 5 bullets in. But because you think the building is more important, you will suffer for that life. But it gets better, because in this country, blacks are now in a large number, and many of the city governments and state governments. And we're getting in larger numbers in the federal government. And so if you look on television every day, you see these black elected officials finally standing up. For years, they were cowards, most of them, and would not stand up for their own people. But you're seeing them finally standing up, thank God. And so George Floyd may have been an angel that came from the ancestors and God to die on that street that day to get the reaction that we've gotten. Mm-hmm. We would not have seen Mr. Shaven go to prison if it was not for a black attorney general taking the case out of the hands of the district attorney. Okay. He would have been walking like all the others have walked. But because we had a black man, an African-American man, an African man that was determined that this would not happen this time, and he came to the court with a team of lawyers, I have never seen that good a case put up by anybody. And it shouldn't have had to have been that. But thank God we had a black man with the guts and the courage to bring other black and white men together to make a political and a legal statement that the world could not refute. So while we fight on those fronts, we need to fight on the international front too. Don't separate these fights. They're the same fight. You know, don't say, oh, small, you're brown, you're not black. Well, black ain't nothing but shades of brown. And brown ain't nothing but shades of black. Our ancestors came up in the midst of South Central Africa and gave birth to all of us. Either we accept that fundamental scientific, anthropological, archaeological truth, political truth, economic truth, or we will continue to be slaves to a handful of backwards little children whose most fundamental ethical principle is greed and terror. It is as simple as that. It's nothing complicated. We're talking about people who are greedy. They want to steal something from somebody and they're willing to kill to do it. And that's what's behind the killing of black men. It ain't just some guy hates you. I grew up with white people. There's some whites who I love dearly and who loved me dearly. There's some white policemen who have saved my life. They didn't have to do it. So I know it's not about the one man. And they knew when they did it, they were going against a system that was going to punish them for helping another citizen not die that day in LAX. When I'm on my knees with guns and the police is coming my way, I'm not alone. There are others with me. Mm-hmm. But there were white men who stepped in and stopped that. I would have been dead long before you were born. And we would have never met. I remember another time on the street with my babies, we protesting for a hospital in the community. I'm harassing with a white cop trying to get his gun out of his holster. I'm holding the gun, a baby strapped in my back, 2 children pulling my arms, and he's trying to hit me with a nightstick. But another young white cop came and put his stick around his neck, grabbed his gun, and said, let that man and his children go, and he let me go. So I can't say this is about white people in that kind of a sense, because that's not what this is about. This is about anti-African culture that is perpetuated by the corporate structures that run the states of the so-called Western civilization or the Western world, in order to, as a minority, maintain power and authority over a majority people whose wealth they want to steal. That's right at the crux of killing the Black Americans in the street, to put terror in your heart, because they know we're not as scared of them. They know we will fight them like we've always done, even if they kill us when we do. But they want you to be afraid. They want you to be too afraid to associate with me. They want you to be too afraid to raise my case, because you might die like me. Well, this group of Africans have told the world, we're not afraid to die. And we will keep dying as we try to push our victory forward, if that's what it takes. Malcolm X told us the price of freedom is death. Dessalines in the Haitian Revolution said it is freedom or death. You know? So it's simple as that. Yes, our people, they kill another young man this morning. We don't quite know why. All of the killings aren't the police fault. There are a few of them where you can clearly see they didn't have any choice. I can live with that. But don't tell me you shoot an unarmed 20-year-old kid because he panicked. All right? And you got four big trained military people on the scene, and one little frail 20-year-old boy, you're going to shoot him to death? You know? So even with the girl on the street the other day, she had a knife. That's a hard one to call, because she might have killed the other woman. And she got shot. So you can't, that's hard to call. The cop's job is to save a life. He don't know why they're fighting, but he sees a knife up in the air coming down towards the other woman. He had already told them to get on the ground. They didn't. He may have not been left with much choice. I doubt if a phaser, whatever that thing, at that distance would have stopped that knife before the lady in pink would have gotten killed or injured severely. And that's sad. But some of this is on us too. We got to take some responsibility for conflict resolution within our own groups.
Correct. You know? Yes.
Unless we're willing to do that, you can't file a complaint. You see? And that's across the board. But what you see happening, the violence against Africans in America, and it happens to a lot of the people from the continent, you know, but nobody says anything. They do not say anything. By the time we even learn about something is a month, 2 months, 3 months has gone by. But they do the same brutality, whether you come from Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon, Chad, or wherever. But because you're an immigrant to the country and you have so many liabilities that you have to face, you keep quiet about the terrorism against you, about the racist abuse and the bad treatment on the job. Or somebody hire you and you do the job for a price and they give you half of what they agreed to and send you on your way. Who are you going to go to? That's why we better learn to love each other, because you can come to me. I will go and confront them because I'm a citizen here. I'm not afraid of him. I, meaning millions of others just like me, will speak for you. But you have to own me and I have to own you. I don't blame my enemy for wanting to kill me. I blame my brothers and sisters for not wanting to save my life.
That's true.